How to build value in your business with a patent portfolio. Everyone knows that IP can be valuable, but it's not always clear how to get the maximum ROI from your IP investment and how to get the biggest value from your IP at exit. Before I forget, click the subscribe button and hit the bell so that you get all the value coming to you in future videos. In figuring out the role of IP and the role it can play in creating value in your business, let's first take a look at how entrepreneurs create value. So in any business, there's two ways in which you create value. First, there's by delivering value to the customers, by selling products and services and generating revenue. In other words, cash flow. So there's value in the cash, there's value in the money that's being made by the company. But the second way in which you create value, it's more of the long-term value, the value of the company as an asset. And the value of the business is based upon its ability to stably deliver value to customers. It has a track record of providing this type of cash flow. And a lot of times that's measured in EBITDA, it's measured by the profitability, and the value of the business is based upon some multiple of that profitability. Because someone buying the company is looking at it as if, well, okay, so if you're making $1 million a year, and we think that it's stable enough that we can keep the party going. In other words, have the company continue to make $1 million a year for at least a few years, and then maybe build something on that. Then maybe it's worth a multiple of 3 or 4 or kind of 3 or 4 times what the company's making. That's often how the entrepreneur gets value from their business. They get the profit, and then they also get the increase in the value of the business over time. Let's now look at how entrepreneurs consider their investment in IP in terms of whether it's going to give them a return on investment, whether they're going to get a value out of it. So usually they're looking at the value of slowing down the competition, of shutting down competitors, of gaining sales due to the differentiation that's created by the IP. So in other words, they're considering the value of their investment in terms of gain revenue or avoiding lost revenue. They're thinking about it in the first definition of value that I gave, in terms of the cash flow or the ongoing day-to-day operation of the business. But I think that entrepreneurs should consider that the real value that they get from investing in IP is in the increased value of their business, because the IP that they create will protect people from entering the marketplace and therefore create a enhanced ability for the business to continue to be profitable, to continue to maintain that market share, to continue to exclude competitors from coming into this space. And this value, though, can lead to a huge ROI on the IP investment when they go to exit the company. So a lot of times they're looking at the investment in terms of cash flow, but if you get towards exit, there's a huge opportunity to get an ROI on that IP investment. Let's take an example. So let's look at the valuation of a business with and without IP. So I'm going to base this example on a $50,000 investment in IP that the company makes, let's say, at an early stage. And then eventually the company has $2 million in EBITDA. And they're looking to exit. They're looking to go for another round of financing. And so valuation now is being considered. So now if they don't have IP, so on that $2 million EBITDA, hypothetically, maybe in their business, they're looking at a 5 times multiple. So $2 million times 5 is $10 million. So basically their valuation would be based on EBITDA only. Now, if they had good IP, so imagine now they have IP that helps them to prevent competitors from entering the space of their product. So I'm going to say now that they're perhaps looking at a valuation of 15 million based upon the EBITDA, and also a component is for the IP owned by the business. So hypothetically, that 5-time multiple gets stretched up a bit to 7.5 based upon the IP. And so instead of 5 million times 2, it's 7.5 times 2, and they get $15 million valuation. And so in this case, the IP added $5 million to that initial investment of $50,000 into IP. If you get to this stage, then the IP has added $5 million, which is a 100-time return on that initial investment of $50,000. Now, what about if you get poor IP? What I mean by poor IP is that not all patents are created equal. Like, some patents are very narrow and very specific and are only for the details of a product. And if you really looked into it deeply, you would say that it doesn't really stop the competition from doing the core of what makes that product work well. So it's kind of IP and name only, let's say. Even in this situation, I'm going to say that that $10 million business would get conservatively $10.5 million based upon the EBITDA plus the IP. So even with the lousy IP, even with the IP and name only, investors still like IP. People like to see it there. And so it would conservatively add $500,000. So $500,000 on the initial $50,000 investment is a 10-time return on IP. So here's the punchline, is that even with lousy IP, even with really crappy patents, it's nearly impossible to not get an ROI on that IP investment if you get to exit. While you're operating your business, and while you're looking at cash flow and looking at your bottom line, you might say, well, was this really worth it? But if you get to exit, it's almost impossible to not get a silly ROI, even on bad IP. But now, what's the difference here? So the difference between these two scenarios, so the difference between having good IP and bad IP, remember, with no IP, we got $10 million. With poor IP, we got $10.5 million. With good IP, we got $15 million. So the difference between having good IP and bad IP was there was a $4.5 million gain by having good IP. And the way that we achieve that $4.5 million gain is by having good IP strategy from the beginning. Good IP strategy that leads toward valuable patents, valuable trademarks. A valuable patent portfolio is the way to enhance your valuation at exit. It's the way to get the biggest ROI on your IP investment. And in general, it's how you build value in your business with a patent portfolio. If you're a business focused and looking to build a patent portfolio to increase your company valuation, go to goldsteinpatentlaw.com/apply and schedule your complimentary patent portfolio strategy session with one of our expert business strategists.